platform is a privilege, that words have consequences, and that power must always be tempered by responsibility. And that's not something that we see in the way people converse as influencers online. Well, Madam President, it is a great pleasure to speak at the Oxford Union in this, your 200th anniversary year. You are celebrating this year 2 centuries of welcoming illustrious and, as has been mentioned in the floor debate, occasionally controversial speakers. But whoever they are, this chamber has never been dazzled by them. What has mattered is not who they are, but the force of their argument and how they put it across here in this room. However famous or rich or powerful they may be, their voice is no more important than any other in this chamber. It is balanced by an equal number of voices on the benches opposite them, and a chamber full of members who can intervene, interact, and interrogate. None of your guests is paid to say what they come here to say, that they enjoy your hospitality as we have tonight. None of them come here to sell you anything other than ideas. What a world away that is from the social media which increasingly dominates our politics and our public discourse. So as you celebrate your bicentenary this year, this society is standing for something rare and precious, and something increasingly in need of defending. A space for rational, rigorous debate, a place where people can disagree robustly but civilly, and an arena in which ideas can be exchanged and cross-examined. Now, your treasurer, speaking first in opposition, just after he cynically tried to turn you all against me by reminding you that I'm not just a Tory, but a Tory from Cambridge, boldly tried to define the debate in these terms by saying that his side of the House merely needed to convince us that the influence of influencers has been, on balance, more good than bad. It's a nice try. But I hope that as an officer of this august society, and especially in this bicentenary year, he will agree that the influence of influencers on our political debate, on our public discourse, is a point worth considering tonight. I hope he'll agree as well that a platform is a privilege, that words have consequences, and that power must always be tempered by responsibility. And that's not something that we see in the way people converse as influencers online. Now, they can do nice things. A Twitch streamer announced, I think earlier this year in New York, that he would give away 300 PlayStations. How very kind of him. But the way he did it, the careless way he did it, sparked chaos in New York City. It resulted in 1,000 NYPD officers trying to restore calm because of the frenzy he had created. A library in Keighley in Yorkshire this year had its collection decimated. It was simply having a jumble sale to try and raise some funds, but a rumour spread online, whether maliciously or accidentally, that it was a closing down sale, and people turned up and helped themselves to the books, and the poor volunteer that ran the library helplessly tried to stop them by ringing a bell and shouting from the gallery. He said afterwards, "I've lost my faith in humanity slightly today." The worst, I think, are the true crime aficionados who fancy themselves as armchair detectives, turn up and start harassing victims and making false accusations and potentially prejudicing trials. We saw that very sadly this year with the case of Nicola Bulley, a young mother who disappeared from home in January this year and was found later by an inquest to have drowned accidentally. A real-time frenzy hampered the police investigation into her death. People turned up in her small village in huge numbers. Villagers actually had to hire a private security firm to go about their lives. Her grieving partner and friends found themselves videoed on people's smartphones. Lancashire police had to issue a dispersal order, and yet one TikToker broke through a police cordon and tried to film them as they dredged her body from the river. That is ghoulish, Madam President. He did it because, let's remember, TikTok pays for the people whose content gets the most views. Another TikToker who spread false information about that case and regretted it later said, if you post something and receive a lot of positivity for it, That can definitely change your behavior. All of a sudden you feel you've got the authority to keep posting. It definitely has the power to alter people's perspective on reality. And that is a point I hope we will all bear in mind as we vote tonight. This is a business model which relies on addiction, not just from the people that use the service, but the people that feed it, by teaching them to crave ever more the next click, the next share, that next dopamine hit. It signs them up at a young age. If any other industry was so predicated on the labor of young people and remunerated them so poorly, we would call it exploitation. And it skews the feedback they receive. Some platforms simply allow you to like. Others allow you to choose from a carefully chosen menu of crafted and addictive emotions, anger, sadness, hysteria. There's no human interaction, no real human interaction. That sort of face-to-face conversation where if you make a joke, you see whether it's actually landed in the right way, whether someone is laughing with you, not at you, whether they're really still listening to you at all. And it drives people into ever more extreme versions of themselves, ever more extreme arguments. The last speaker on our side of the house, the former returning officer from St Hilda's, talked about how people of moderate dispositions can find themselves drawn to arguments in the extremities of politics, particularly on the extreme right, simply because it's good content, because it gives them that dopamine hit, because it brings the cash in. The more cynical, the more lucrative. Andrew Tate is not a name that needs to be mentioned again this evening. He's not somebody that requires any more oxygen of publicity. But it's right that we have remembered him as we talk about the influence of influencers tonight. He is a creation of reality TV from Big Brother, the precursor, I suppose, of modern social media. He's currently awaiting trial for charges of rape, of human trafficking, and of the organised criminal exploitation of women. And yet, as my colleague has just reminded us, a horrifying proportion of boys and young men still think he has a point, that he's worth listening to. They do that because of the echo chambers, of which we were reminded in a contribution from the floor. These are an essential part of the architecture of the social media platforms on which influencers converse. It is what makes people keep coming back. It's what makes them join in the conversation, to share, to try and spread these malicious untruths. And it's a revelation of the fact that it's not the influencers who have the influence. It's the platforms, the people who designed them, the people who calculate the algorithms, and the people who make the much larger profits from the content that influencers post. The Andrew Tates of this world can, in extremis and far too belatedly, be taken off platforms, but they're always picked up by others who are happy for a short while to make money off of their hatred. And my colleague who spoke second on this side of the House spoke about the need for professional codes of conduct, for ethical standards and for regulation. She spoke as somebody who is a journalist and therefore knows the power of the words that she writes and the content that she shares. We heard from the last speaker on the other side of the House, rightly, about the way that conventional media, the old advertising schemes, have in the past contributed to negative images of people's sense of their own body. But magazines have editors. TV channels and radio stations can choose at what time they broadcast adverts. They can make sure that they're not broadcasting content that is not suitable for younger viewers. Social media streams this directly into our handheld device with the blue light that keeps us awake in the small hours of the morning. 5 years ago, the Advertising Standards Authority said that any advert or free product that was being pushed on social media should be flagged with a hashtag. But a survey last year said that only 35% of influencers abide by those rules. My colleague spoke about the need, rightly, for media literacy. I have the privilege of being the arts minister. I'm a history graduate. I think there's a role not just for teaching media literacy in schools, but for teaching the critical thinking that comes with doing those sorts of subjects, whether at school or university. But we do need to equip people with critical thinking, with the skills that we're exercising by choosing to be here in this debating chamber tonight. And when you come to leave Oxford, you are going to need those skills of critical thinking, of healthy skepticism, more than any generation that came before you, because of the way the internet, the social media, is dominating and warping our discourse. There's a role for government too, and I want to end on an optimistic note, I hope. Last week, the Online Safety Act achieved royal assent and became law. It is the first attempt to get social media companies to put their house in order, to abide by their terms and conditions, to be clear with people who sign up to their services what they might expect, the tools that are at their disposal to avoid the content or the anonymous users they don't want to interact with, and if they let them down, to give them a recourse to go to Ofcom to make sure that those companies can be held to account. So government and Parliament have acted. I hope that big tech and social media companies will act too. But I agree with the points that have been made on both sides of the House tonight, that what matters above all is action from all of us. Yes, with more interesting content, more wholesome content, I hope too, but also with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism. I think our default position should be to question the influence of anybody in a position of influence. The internet has done a great deal to broaden the conversation, to bring more voices into our global discourse, but it still augments and amplifies algorithmically the voice of too few and for the wrong reasons. That is a matter, I think, for regret, and a reason, I hope, that you will walk through the eyes door when you leave the chamber this evening.